The evening sky over Manhattan shimmered in hues of gold and violet as an exclusive set of guests arrived at Trump Tower on March 20, 2025. The occasion? Barron Trump's 19th birthday, a celebration that had been planned with the elegance and grandeur befitting the son of a sitting U.S. president. The event was a private affair attended by family, close friends, and a select few dignitaries from politics, academia, and business. The grand ballroom on the top floor was bathed in warm golden lights. Large glass windows framed the breathtaking skyline of New York City, reflecting the glow of the chandelier hanging above. The long tables were adorned with crimson and ivory roses, and the soft tunes of a live jazz band filled the air. At the far end of the hall stood the birthday boy himself, Barron Trump, taller than ever at nearly 6 feet 8 inches, dressed in an elegant navy blue suit. He exuded a quiet confidence, greeting guests with a firm handshake and a polite smile, yet there was still a trace of shyness about him. His father, President Donald Trump, stood beside him, proud as ever, engaging in conversation with key figures in attendance. His mother, Melania, watched her son with soft eyes, her radiant presence adding to the grace of the evening. The guest list included an eclectic mix of personalities, business tycoons, celebrities, and even some of Barron's childhood friends. But amidst the glamour and prestige, one guest stood out, a man who, at first glance, seemed out of place among the high-profile crowd. He was a distinguished professor from NYU Stern School of Business, Dr. Alan Whitmore, a scholar of economics and leadership and a known critic of the Trump administration. His presence at the event raised a few eyebrows, but those who knew the backstory understood why he had been invited. Dr. Whitmore had been Barron's mentor and advisor during a special program at NYU where the young Trump had displayed a surprising aptitude for economics and philosophy. It was Barron himself who had requested the professor's presence, and Donald Trump, despite his reservations, had agreed. The whispers among the guests speculated about what the professor would say in his toast. As dinner concluded and the moment arrived for speeches, the hall quieted. President Trump delivered his usual larger-than-life remarks, boasting about his son's achievements, his height, and of course, the greatness of the Trump legacy. Melania spoke next, her words filled with motherly pride, reflecting on Barron's growth and his quiet but determined spirit. Then, with a nod from Barron, the floor was given to Dr. Whitmore. As he stepped forward, the audience sat in anticipation, unsure of what was to come. Would he be critical? Would he be neutral? Or would he, for the first time, show admiration for the family that many in the academic world often scrutinized? Dr. Whitmore adjusted his glasses, took a deep breath, and began. Dr. Alan Whitmore stood at the podium, his sharp eyes scanning the expectant faces before him. The jazz band had gone silent, the clinking of glasses ceased, and all attention was fixed on the NYU professor, a man known for his intellectual critiques and sharp wit. Even President Trump, who often dismissed academia as filled with so-called experts, leaned in slightly, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Dr. Whitmore began with a smile, a rare expression for the otherwise serious professor. I must admit, when I received the invitation to speak here tonight, I hesitated. After all, I am not a man of grand parties or golden chandeliers. I am a man of books, lectures, and sometimes uncomfortable truths. But when Barron himself reached out, I knew I had to be here. Because, contrary to popular belief, this is not just the birthday of a president's son. This is the celebration of a young man who has chosen to define himself beyond the shadows of his surname. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Even Barron tilted his head slightly, intrigued. Dr. Whitmore continued, his voice steady and warm. I first met Barron at NYU's Young Scholars Program, a program meant to challenge the brightest young minds with complex theories of economics, leadership, and philosophy. At first, I assumed he was attending merely as a formality, an extension of the Trump legacy. But I was wrong. From the first seminar, Barron Trump proved to be something unexpected, thoughtful, questioning, and, dare I say, refreshingly humble. President Trump raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Melania exchanged a glance with Barron, who remained still, his hands folded in front of him. One particular discussion remains vivid in my memory. We were debating the works of Adam Smith and Karl Marx, the two pillars of economic thought. It was a heated room, some students fiercely defending capitalism, others challenging its moral implications. And then, from the back of the room, Barron spoke. He said, perhaps the greatest flaw in both ideologies is the failure to recognize that wealth alone does not define success, character does. Gasps filled the room. This was not the kind of rhetoric one expected from a Trump. President Trump himself chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as if amused. Now, I am not here to assign political labels to Barron. I am not here to say he is one thing or another. What I am here to say is that he is his own person. He carries the weight of a name known across the world, but he does not let it dictate who he is. That, my friends, is the mark of true leadership. The professor's voice softened. Barron, I have watched you challenge ideas, embrace different perspectives, and most importantly, listen before you speak. That is a rare trait, especially in our world today. It takes strength to be born into power, but it takes even greater strength to carve your own path. And that is exactly what you are doing. Melania dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Some guests, perhaps expecting a typical political speech, found themselves unexpectedly moved. Even Ivanka and Eric Trump, seated toward the front, exchanged quiet nods of acknowledgement. Dr. Whitmore raised his glass. So tonight, let us not celebrate just the son of a president. Let us celebrate Barron Trump not as an heir to a legacy, but as a young man stepping into his own. May your journey be defined not by expectations, but by the values you hold dear. Happy birthday, Barron. The room erupted in applause. Even President Trump, despite his usual bravado, gave a small nod of approval. Barron, for his part, looked humbled, his usual reserved demeanor shifting into something more reflective. As the claps faded and guests returned to their conversations, a new energy filled the air. This wasn't just another speech at a Trump event. It was something more, something deeper. And as Barron Trump stood there, shaking hands and thanking his guests, it became clear tonight wasn't just about a birthday. It was about a beginning. As the applause died down, President Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, a rare moment of quiet contemplation crossing his face. The speech by Dr. Whitmore had been unexpected. It wasn't the usual praise-filled tribute he was accustomed to hearing at events like this. It wasn't about wealth, power, or the Trump brand, it was about Barron as an individual. For a man who had spent his life building an empire and a name that echoed across the world, this idea of individuality within his own family struck a chord. He had always assumed that his children, Donald Jr., Ivanka, Eric, Tiffany, and Barron, would carry on the Trump legacy just as he had done. But now, for the first time, he wondered, was Barron's path meant to be different? Melania placed a gentle hand on his arm. She had noticed the introspection in his eyes. "He is growing up, Donald," she said softly. "And he is becoming his own man." Trump exhaled, nodding slightly but saying nothing. He wasn't one for deep sentimentality, but even he had to admit there was something different about Barron. Unlike his older siblings who had embraced the Trump name in business and politics, Barron had always been more reserved, more thoughtful. He wasn't one to seek the spotlight. He was the observer in the family, quietly analyzing the world around him. The birthday celebration continued with laughter, toasts, and music. Guests came up to Barron, congratulating him not just on his birthday but on the speech that had just been given about him. Even those who had expected another typical Trump family event were leaving with a newfound respect for the youngest member of the dynasty. As Barron moved through the crowd, shaking hands and engaging in polite conversation, President Trump watched him closely. The boy who had once been a quiet, lanky teenager following his parents through the White House hallways was now a young man standing confidently among world leaders, business magnates, and intellectuals. And then, in a rare moment of sincerity, Trump called out, "Barron, come here." Barron turned, his blue eyes meeting his father's. He approached, hands in his pockets, towering over his father, a physical contrast that did not go unnoticed by those around them. Trump clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. "That was some speech, huh?" He smirked. "Didn't know you were a philosopher." Barron chuckled lightly. "I try." Trump studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You really think character is more important than wealth?" Barron met his father's gaze, considering his words carefully. "I think wealth without character is meaningless." The room seemed to quiet, at least in Trump's mind. It was an answer he hadn't expected, and yet, it lingered in his thoughts. After a pause, Trump laughed, patting his son's back. "Well, kid, you've got both, so I guess you're all set." Barron smiled, but there was something else in his eyes, something deeper. For the first time, Donald Trump wondered if his youngest son might not follow the path he had envisioned for him. And for the first time, he realized maybe that wasn't a bad thing. As the evening wore on, guests continued to mingle, but Barron felt the weight of something unspoken. The speech by Dr. Whitmore had stirred something in him, something he had long felt but had never put into words. Excusing himself from a conversation with one of his cousins, Barron made his way to the balcony overlooking the shimmering New York skyline. The cool breeze was refreshing, a stark contrast to the warmth and energy inside. He needed a moment to think. A voice behind him broke the silence. You know, when I was your age, my father never doubted for a second that I would take over the family business. Barron turned to see his eldest sister, Ivanka Trump, stepping onto the balcony. Dressed in an elegant silver gown, she carried the same poise she had always been known for. Yet tonight, there was something different in her tone. Something softer, almost nostalgic. Barron offered a small smile. And you did. Ivanka leaned against the balcony railing. I did, but I never really asked myself if I wanted to. I just did what was expected. Barron studied her carefully. Ivanka had always seemed like the ideal Trump heir, graceful, ambitious, seamlessly balancing business and politics. Yet for the first time he detected something else in her expression. A hint of what could have been. I think Dad expects the same from me, Barron admitted. Ivanka nodded. He probably does. Barron hesitated before speaking again. But what if I want something different? Ivanka turned to him fully now, her eyes searching his. Then you have to be ready to fight for it. The words lingered between them. You're different from the rest of us, Barron, she continued. You always have been. You don't crave the spotlight. You don't fight for power. You think before you speak. That's why Dr. Whitmore respects you so much. It's why so many people in that room tonight saw you in a new light. Barron exhaled, looking back at the city. I just don't know where I fit in all of this. Ivanka smiled gently. You don't have to decide tonight. But when the time comes, make sure the decision is yours, not anyone else's. Barron nodded slowly, absorbing her words. As they stood together, the weight of the Trump name between them, Barron realized something. Tonight wasn't just about a birthday. It was about choices. About identity. About stepping into the unknown. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. As the night wore on, the party began to wind down. Guests started bidding their farewells, and the golden glow of the ballroom softened as the celebration slowly transitioned into quiet conversations among family and close friends. Barron found himself standing near the grand piano, absent-mindedly running his fingers along the polished surface. His mind replayed Dr. Whitmore's speech, his father's reaction, and Ivanka's quiet words of advice. The weight of it all settled on him in a way he hadn't quite expected. Then Dr. Whitmore approached him once more, a glass of water in his hand instead of champagne. Quite the night, wouldn't you say? Barron chuckled. Yeah, definitely one to remember. The professor studied him for a moment before speaking. I meant what I said up there, Barron. You have a mind that isn't bound by expectations. You question things. You think critically. That's rare. Barron exhaled, nodding. But is it enough? Whitmore's expression turned serious. That depends on what you want it to be enough for. Barron hesitated, then voiced something he had never said out loud before. I don't think I want to go into politics. Or business, not in the way my father expects, at least. Dr. Whitmore smiled knowingly. Then don't. Barron frowned. It's not that simple. Of course it isn't, the professor said. But nothing worth doing ever is. He placed a firm hand on Barron's shoulder. Your last name will always be a part of you, but it doesn't have to define you. You have the luxury of choosing what kind of legacy you want to leave. Most people don't get that choice. Barron fell silent, letting the words sink in. At that moment, President Trump walked over, his signature presence commanding the space around him. Dr. Whitmore gave a respectful nod and stepped back, allowing father and son a private moment. Trump glanced at his son. So, he said, what did you think of all that? Barron met his father's gaze. It was unexpected. Trump smirked. You could say that. He then studied his son for a moment, something unreadable in his eyes. You know, when I was your age, I didn't have the luxury of figuring out who I was. I had to take over the business. There was no choice. Barron nodded slowly. And you think I don't have a choice? Trump was silent for a moment. Then, in a rare display of candor, he said, I think you're different. And maybe that's a good thing. Barron was stunned. His father, the man who had built an empire on his own terms, who had always expected strength and loyalty, was acknowledging that his path might not be the same. For the first time that evening, Barron felt truly seen. Trump patted his son's shoulder. Whatever you decide, kid, just be the best at it. That's all I ask. Barron smiled. I can do that. As his father walked away to say goodbye to the remaining guests, Barron looked around the room one last time. The night had started as a celebration of his birthday, but it had turned into something much more, a turning point, a moment of clarity. Tonight, a seed had been planted. A new path was beginning. And for the first time, Barron Trump wasn't just the son of a president. He was his own person.